You know, most Wednesdays, taking time out of his day, is Dr. Joe. Dr. Joe Congeni, Sports Medicine Center at Akron Children's Hospital, on board with us this morning. And Dr. Joe, good morning, my friend. And I guess, first of all, Tristan Thompson gets on the court last night.
Yep.
Recovering from that strained calf or whatever it was. I'll let you get into that a little bit. 5 minutes on the court last night for him.
Yeah. We did get a sighting of him last night, and a little different. You and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, scratching our head. Wow, a calf strain. That seems like a long time. He's getting lost over there. What happened to him? And instead of being 3 to 4 weeks, as they said, it was more like 6 to 8 weeks. And, I mean, isn't this social media kind of like a beautiful thing? Did you hear what he was actually putting out on social media in the last couple of days? He's been saying, oh, yeah, you know, I knew for sure it wasn't going to be 3 to 4 weeks. It was a more serious problem. I was on crutches the whole first week. I knew this was going to take a while. Even in further circles, I hear he even mentioned the word that it was a plantaris tear or a rupture of the plantaris muscle. I don't know if you heard that.
I did not.
And he said, if you really want to know the story, you could DM me and I'll give you the whole story. But I chose not to DM him. But anyway, just kind of interesting. It was a point to bring up. The plantaris muscle, Ray, is a muscle, little, small, pretty tiny muscle from behind the knee, just under the calf, to down all the way down to the ankle. And there's long been debate in sports medicine circles and musculoskeletal orthopedic circles, does this have a very big role? But this muscle is notorious to rupturing or popping, and I have probably in a 30-year career had so many adult people call me in the range of age of 30, 40, 50 that I was pushing a car out of the snow like today, or coming to the net in tennis or racquetball, and I feel a pop in the back of my ankle, and people in fact call it tennis leg. And the question is whether just rupturing the plantaris or also getting some tearing of the gastrocnemius, the calf muscle, the muscle tendon junction. It ends up with swelling and bruising and loss of motion. And the first week, a lot of people with pretty significant tears of this little muscle, and also maybe with the calf muscle, they limp around and they're on crutches, and then gradually we get rid of the swelling and the pain, and we start getting the range of motion. They start bearing weight around week 2 or 3, and then they're back more so like 6 to 8 weeks. So kind of interesting that he let the cat out of the bag. He had something a little more involved going on, a very common adult problem called tennis leg in the back of the calf, where there's actually, instead of just straining the calf, it's more of a tear.
Dr. Joe Congeni with us, 1590 WAKR. Joe, we've had some kind of hiccups and question marks pertaining around this concussion protocol in the NFL in the last month. We had the Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson go in, but really not go in. And then last weekend, it really came front and center with the quarterback from the Houston Texans, Savage. He was sacked, and you could see him almost quivering on the ground, did a test, and then they sent him back into the football game before eventually taking him out here. And I guess from a doctor's perspective, how are you looking at this?
Yeah, it's a concern, Ray, and we keep talking about the fact that concussion's so different from other injuries like the one we talked about earlier this morning, and so difficult to manage. So I hate to be Monday morning quarterback guy, I really do. But the fact is that in this case, what is so frustrating about it is that especially in the NFL, where they're talking so much about wanting to make changes and having cameras everywhere, having a neurologist on the sidelines, having athletic trainers that are independent up in the booth, most of concussion symptoms, and you hear me say this a lot, you can probably treat it better than a lot of medical people now, you've heard it so much, Ray, is that the symptoms are variable. So everybody's looking for things like dizziness or eye symptoms or headache symptoms, but a lot of times the symptoms are invisible. but there's so many different symptoms you can get when you're concussed, and a few of them are visible. And one of the visible symptoms you can get is involuntary movements. In other words, he wasn't in control of his movements. That's what made everybody, by seeing the video, so uncomfortable seeing it. These were seizure-like movements, and in fact may well have been a seizure that he was experiencing. And this does happen in certain cases of concussion, Ray. And so this is visible. You can see it. He's involuntary movements and definitely having seizure-like activity, and definitely that's a sign of a more significant brain injury and concussion, that should have had him off the field if you had a camera. Now, again, not being a look-over-the-shoulder guy, I cover a lot of high school, I cover college. From the sidelines, maybe in the end zone, I wouldn't have been able to see that on a typical day without a camera everywhere, but there's no doubt that's what everybody in America saw with the camera. And so this was one of the less common, but also one of the things that you'll see with the presentation of a concussion, an apparent seizure or involuntary movements that this football player exhibited, and clearly should have been one of those that he's concussed and he's out. Maybe it was missed, however that happened, but you called it a hiccup. Yeah, we're still struggling with the concussion protocol, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think the bigger story here, Joe, is when head coach Bill O'Brien of the Texans says, well, he was asked about it. He said, hey, I'm just a football coach.
That's right.
I'm putting him. And to me, Joe, that's a big problem right there. It doesn't take a doctor to see that the young football player was in trouble.
Yeah. It was interesting because I read his quotes too a couple times, because these are tough on medical people, let alone coaches. But he said, first thing he said was, hey, we have all kinds of people, and I leave that decision to somebody else. I'm just a football coach, like you said. But then he went on to say, if I would have seen this the first time and I was on the sidelines and looking at other stuff, if I would have seen that the first time, he would have come out and I would not have let him back in the game.
That. Yeah, of course he said that, right?
Yeah.
I mean...
So after the fact. So many of these things are invisible. This was an absolutely, perfect example of the rare cases that occur sometimes with concussion where you actually see visible changes.
Well, Joe, that's the one thing that I've been leery about, is that will to win. Not so much high school, collegiate, because there's a big picture there with these young men, but that will and that pressure to win in the NFL. And we've seen it in the last month. You're getting playoff time. Games mean a little bit more. You can see where they're pushing the envelope in regards to these concussion tests.
Yeah, it's so hard because for so many other and all the rest of the injuries and musculoskeletal injuries, the mindset is almost, hey, the best ability that an athlete, the football player gives me is availability, being able to play and play through so many things. And they do. They love this tag of warriors and play through so many things, football players. But there's certain things we got to change the mindset that you don't want to play through, especially in a situation like this where you see something was going on. This was clearly a concussion, and you need to make sure that brain recovers before he goes back in.
No doubt, Joe. Listen, thanks for the visit. We'll catch up with you next week.
All right, Ray. Have a great week.
You too, my friend. Dr. Joe Congeni, Sports Medicine Center at Akron Children's Hospital.